Okay, this is me, Nick Dutch, having a look at a witchcraft video. One I actually quite enjoy, alright? I quite like this one. There's still issues with the way in which it's explained. It's done by someone called Half Witch. And I think that she's got a very good demeanor. I think she's got some quite good intentions as far as a person is concerned. However, I look at the content and I ask a few questions, okay? That's just all there is to it. So let's just see what happens here.
Internet, I get asked a lot of questions and I love answering as many of them as I can, but I feel like some of them really need their own dedicated video.
I would start by saying that nearly everything which is said on the internet full stop requires a hell of a lot of elaboration and expansion and lots of extra research. So essentially we can't just have like different points of view. We have to have people equipped to intellectually break stuff down and work out what's really real. I mean, that's surely what we should be heading for.
And today I wanted to talk about one of the most enduring questions I have ever been asked. How do I take myself from a beginner practitioner to someone more experienced?
What do you mean? As opposed to beginner, as opposed to experience, and what ways are we going to think about this in terms of magic or witchcraft, and what we actually mean by magic and witchcraft, and what we actually mean by being beginner or intermediate or advanced, and in what way can we classify it and break it down into manageable chunks.
Today's video is going to be all about it.
Rather like her cool imagery, actually.
So for anyone who's new here, hello, my name is Hearth. Thank you so much for choosing this video, and if you've been here for a long time, thank you so much for coming back. I always appreciate it. Now, if we were to look at the world of witchcraft, I think it looks a lot like a pyramid. You get a lot of people at the bottom section of this pyramid that are beginners to witchcraft. They're just starting out, perhaps they were inspired by a movie or a TV show, perhaps they found a book in a charity shop, or they found a book in, I don't know, Urban Outfitters or something, and it inspired them to want to start learning. Above them are people who are a little bit more experienced in their practice. Perhaps they've spent a couple of weeks doing it, they've realised that this is something that they do want to start working on long term, and then above them are the more advanced practitioners still, those who've probably been doing it for about a year.
No, I would not say that 1 year would be enough to make you advanced in anything whatsoever. I hold a strong quantity of objection to the idea that 1 year is somehow enough for you to be regarded as being an expert in something. Remember, of course, that what witchcraft promises is the ability to interact with invisible forces for the purposes of creating change in the physical and spiritual worlds, and therefore so on and so forth. So it's got to have much more stuff going to it, you know, stuff going on with it. We're talking about creating change in your brain, in your body, in your mind, creating changes of perception, and then using that skillfully in some structured way for the purposes of attempting to create, you know, what it is that you desire, whatever that is. I mean, surely we're talking about a lifelong, you know, a whole lifetime of learning and practices and self-criticism and putting things to the test robustly. I mean, as far as your structure, your idea there of like, there's people who start out because they've like seen something on TV or they've read a book, and then hey presto, like 1 year later they're sort of like more advanced. No, they're still someone who's just like read a book or seen something on television. They haven't really applied scientific methodology to anything that they've experienced, and therefore presumably they've just developed beliefs. And therefore, okay, you know, you can discuss this from the point of view of improving your own personal prayer craft and how you would like to do things in a religious sense, but it still does not necessarily mean that you've got like the power of magic. What it means is that you're discussing how to improve the comforts and the aesthetics of your prayer within your religion, more than necessarily creating reliable changes in the outer world.
And you'll notice as we go up the pyramid, the numbers are getting less and less and less.
And that is part of the problem. So you've got the vast majority of people who are talking from their common language points of view, something which is essentially a kindergarten level of understanding rather than necessarily the PhD qualification, as it were, in terms of thought and nuance in terms of what is really real and what is really true. And that's one of the reasons why within the pagan community they don't tend to say things like, we're talking about a spiritual path which has certain particular defining characteristics and so on and so forth, and then going into those defining characteristics in sufficient depth to provide a sufficient understanding. Instead, they just use the word it's this, it that, it the other, because they're too inarticulate, because they're learning from people who are still thinking like people from kindergarten. And that's the generic problem throughout the whole, movement. You got a lot of people who are choosing to stay at a substandard level.
The very top of that pyramid are the people that have been practicing for the majority of their lives.
And unfortunately, that means someone like myself, okay? Deal with it.
Those that have been practicing for 50, 60 years and are very experienced in their magical
Okay, I haven't been practicing for 50 or 60 years, but I've grown enough to become a transcendental deist. Alright.
tradition. The numbers start dwindling because as people begin their journey, they realise maybe this takes a little bit more effort than they were expecting, or perhaps they become stagnant in their practice and they decide that it just isn't for them. But there's a lot of people who struggle.
But then it's also a question of what do you mean by the practice? What aspects of your self-challenging in your meditation and prayerful work and you opening up chakras are we talking about here? What particular struggles during what you would call ritual practice, or what particular struggles in terms of defining and creating energy and sending it, and in what particular challenges in terms of specific results and generating them reliably are we talking about here? Obviously there's a lot going on, and the people who are dwindling because they've decided that the practice isn't for them are the people who have not dedicated themselves to attempt to live a spiritual life forever, which is essentially what you're talking about here. It's like trying to become like a DIY Zen monk. That's the closest analogy I could give.
To make the leap from being a beginner practitioner to being more advanced. And if they get stuck in this period of time for too long, they can often feel like they aren't good enough in their practice, that witchcraft is too expensive, that they don't understand how to progress.
Well, that's predominantly because people are learning from other people, and the people that they're learning from haven't really done that much in terms of like breaking things down and proper intellectual thought and discussion about what's really happening, and looking at all the various different sources which is out there and trying to find some variety of connection between all the various existing ideas, and then directly and deliberately going through the process of creating the experiments to put those ideas to the test, to work out which ones are more likely to be accurate and reliable and which ones aren't, and then from that point to be able to develop a cohesive science or body of knowledge associated with, let's say, the energy field and how that's supposed to operate, and thereby to try and find a constructive way of reliably using that very same force for the benefit of real change. But in reality we could be talking about a subject which is more to do with a dance with tides of energy and forces, rather than necessarily something which is like an electric switch and you can flick it and hey presto you can turn the light on. It's not, and the fact that people use like a reductionist language such as it works or it doesn't work without actually thinking about the fact that that lower language is not actually applicable to the phenomena in question, thereby makes us want to ask more questions about the quality of explanation of magic and witchcraft, rather than necessarily whether there is an actual force there.
And so I wanted to cover a few options today that I think could be really, really useful and that massively helped me make that leap from being a beginner to the craft to being someone that is at least a little bit more experienced.
Yeah, but now you're talking about the craft, but the craft is the craft of what? Alright, because the way it's coming over is just like the craft of religion, and the craft of you making your religion work in a manner which is comfortable for yourself as a person. Therefore we're talking about aesthetics. We're not talking about the science and art of changing conformity with the will and dealing directly with spiritual entities and having a full and complete thorough understanding of how one should be able to do that in a manner which would be reliable.
And I still don't consider myself to be adept in this practice at all. I'm totally...
No one should. We're all just human beings, and as Dean Radin said, human skill is variable. Therefore, essentially, you're going to have times when, you get a stomach bug, or you get a fever, or you haven't slept, and hey presto, you can't do what you wanted to do previously. Because, hey presto, your body and your mind is in a different state.
Still learning. So the first piece of advice that I can give is to make sure that your foundational practices are effective.
Right, this bit of a video I think is good. Alright, pay attention to this, guys and girls.
I've found this to be one of the main reasons why people stop practicing witchcraft. They feel like all of a sudden their magic just stops manifesting, and so they go, well, clearly this isn't for me, or...
Well, then we got a question about what we mean by manifesting and why you think it is that your ritual has actually done the work in question, and therefore why you feel you are qualified to use the phrase "it works," let's say, on the basis that something comes along which seems to be in agreement with your candle burning or whatever it is you've been doing.
Well, clearly this isn't real, I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, and essentially the thoughts of, this isn't real will come up an awful lot, because essentially a lot of the explanation which is given is not an explanation based upon attempting to understand the energy field and how it operates, and explaining that in truth and in clarity and in reality. A better source to go to for that sort of thing is Barbara Ann Brennan and her writings on spiritual healing. Trust me on this.
But having a really good foundational practice means that if we go through a slump, if we're struggling at any point, if we're changing up our style of practice, we still have a foundation to build up on. It's the equivalent of building a house on a stable foundation.
Now, what we're talking about here, and she explains it in a few minutes, is basically developmental exercises and building a practice and a routine in your life of basic developmental practices, which therefore has an effect upon you mentally and emotionally, and help to calm you down, give you perspective which is generally healthy for you, and also it acts as a foundation for the purposes of other forms of development once you've got that stuff like a bit more comfortable in you. But that next stage is when you're opening up properly and you're doing the ascension meditation to try and actually reach into the genuine spiritual world, so you can have the genuine spiritual world experiences, which is not taught in a video of this type.
Foundation versus building it in a bog. One of them is going to sink and crumble a lot quicker than the other. And one
You can sink and crumble in both particular cases. It doesn't really matter. It's just a question of why you are doing what you're doing and whether you actually think you can get to where you want to with it. Whereas many people just can't, and that's one of the reasons why they give up, because they're told magic works, and hey presto, they don't get their lover back, they don't get their marriage healed, they don't get their career repaired, they don't get their diseases destroyed and their healing happening. But yet it's promised. That's another reason why people leave magic, whereas basically a better explanation is that this is a form of spiritualism, psychic reading, energy work, and pretty much that's it. And that's, we should stop at that particular thing.
One thing that I've commonly found to happen is that when people are really passionate about something at the very, very start, they're very excited, they've got a lot of energy for it, or they have a lot of desperation for something to
Right, this is where I have a disagreement, okay?
manifest, it'll manifest pretty easily with...
Okay, so essentially if you're really, really desperate for something and you light your yellow candle on Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock on the planetary hour, whatever it is, because you're feeling a bit intense about something, it's just going to happen? Can you really sit down your arse and say that with a smile on your face? No, it's nothing to do with that. On the basis that there is a very real magic, then you've got to be thinking about it in terms of the quantity of energy that you're using, the right type of energy that you're using, how that energy would then interact with other energies in the space, which you would have had to work out through some variety of divinatory practice, and you would have had to find a way of bringing that energy into that environment in a manner which is reliable and creates sufficient energetic change for you to start to bring about the changes that you seek. And it's got to be sufficiently powerful, alright, for you to not to need to interject in any physical sense whatsoever, in order for you to say it's the magic that's working, as opposed to you doing something in your life.
with very little experience and skill.
I mean, just turning around and saying if you're intense about something, it's going to happen, that's a load of hooey, I'm sorry.
Because you're putting a lot of energy into it, even if...
What do you mean by energy? Now, if you carry on with proper spiritual development, so to speak, alright, proper, doing your circle casting, your ascension meditation, your chakras, and the body scan, and all the rest of that, after a while, you will start to get different forms of energy perception. Okay, and you start to see the flames of fire that's spoken about in the book of Acts in the Bible. The energy field, the aura, it's a thing. But you have to reach certain levels of opening up in order to be able to do that. And then you can understand the different types of energy, because you can see it. Briefly, momentarily, fleetingly. But again, you get these moments of seeing it. there's someone very close to me who I'm pretty sure, because they've been living in a moldy environment for the past 35 years, and they got an infection of mold and fungus. And one day I opened up and I saw it inside them. Okay, sometimes, you know, but it was only fleeting. It was only, but the energy was there. I could see what the energy was. Therefore, I could work out, possibly, if that person allowed me to do some healing on them, maybe to find a different form of energy which I could then put in to push that stuff out, and you know, and so on and so forth. But it requires a bit more thought.
If you don't understand how or why, you're still doing it. But then once you progress a little bit further in your magical practice, and maybe that urgent...
In what context? What are we talking about when we're talking about skill development? What are we talking about when we're talking about moving further forward? Can you be more precise? No? Okay.
Need for a response isn't there, but you want to practice something. Or perhaps that initial desire to practice is gone and now you want to develop it further. All of a sudden your workings just stop manifesting. A lot of people can take this...
What do you mean by stop manifesting? What do you mean by stop manifesting? Because that would imply that magic doesn't work, or your magic doesn't work. Alright? Or that any results aren't reliable. I mean, has this particular video so far gone into great detail about, let's say, the configuration of the aura, the different levels of the aura in the energy field, how clean the body and mind needs to be in order for the energy to be sent, how much work needs to be done to be able to do the right quality and type of visualization, and in what way can you tell that it is visualization that moves energy? In what way can you tell? Then how can you put that to the test against the real world? Alright, to be able to say that this particular method for raising this particular variety and type of energy is actually doing its stuff. Alright, there's questions here, man.
As a sign that witchcraft isn't real, that magic doesn't work, or that it simply isn't for them. But
now, it's not a question of witchcraft isn't real or magic isn't for them, okay? It's a question of, is this force sufficient for me to get what I want from it in a manner which is reliable, as is promised by those who talk about magic? Alright, and can the individual develop sufficient skill and perception and ability to be able to make that happen? These are serious questions that a person getting interested in magic or witchcraft or occultism needs to have answered, and this video is not specifically going into that.
really, it's just that you're not in a high energy situation anymore. If you're not in a high energy
Right, okay. God, high energy situations. What do you mean by that? You can't just turn around to someone and say, just because you believe in yourself that things are going to happen, or just because you're feeling intense at the moment, things are going to happen and you're going to manifest this, that and the other. You cannot go around telling people this, because then that makes people start to think that they've got to end up in a hyper state of intensity in order to get any of their wishes fulfilled, which is then going to drive people mad yet again. So therefore, it's not good words. Right, it's not good words.
situation.
Now, it could just be that you don't actually understand the phenomena in question. That would make an awful lot of sense, because most of us don't. At the end of your video, you say that, we can't go around saying that we know everything. But I think that when we do say something, we got to be able to, make sense with it, you know what I mean?
Then you need to be adding that energy through other means. And that's where our foundational practices come in. Ideally, I would recommend learning some kind of mind calming or meditation technique, visualization, or some alternative such as writing down your desired intentions, singing it, speaking it, drawing a picture, whatever that might be, centering and grounding,
This is quite good stuff, actually.
energy sensing and energy manipulation. These are what I would consider the core practices that we can then build up on as...
Yes. Good girl. 10 out of 10 for effort and thought. You've actually done a lot of good stuff there, and I'm very proud of you. Your mother and father should be very proud if they're watching you from wherever. This is a good description of the things that is basically a lot of our life. Okay, we got to do things to calm our mind down, to remove interference from within. Visualization practice is essential, because from that we end up being able to define the energy. Centering, like mind calming, is about being present in a place with an intention. Grounding, very similar. Energy sensing and energy manipulation, that is, again, go back to Barbara Ann Brennan and start reading about what she says about that stuff, because essentially that's where you need to go for it. Okay, but yeah, that's just our life, right? That's just that's just what we have to live by.
As time goes on, once we have these practices in place and we are practicing them again and again and again, then it means that when we are struggling with energy, we have low energy, we maybe aren't feeling 100%, or perhaps we're doing workings where it isn't a high energy working, it's something where we can be a little bit more calm in that situation, we are still going to be able to manifest results.
No, that's the wrong way of expressing it. It's not a question of manifesting results, because otherwise I would have won the lottery by now, I'd be living on a desert island surrounded by lots of naked 21-year-old girls, and life would be really rather sweet, okay? So it's not a question of that, it's a question of doing neurogenesis and neuroplasticity for the purposes of being able to get into those particular skill states so that you can hypothetically open up and do more things when it comes to mediumship, spiritualism, opening up, energy work, and all kinds of other fun stuff. It's training, it's self-training. But it's not necessarily a question of you can do those things, then hey presto, you can manifest your intentions and everything is fine. Because that would be a gross simplification of what is obviously a very complicated subject. You have to forgive me, my hand's shaking a bit too much today. B vitamin deficiency, I think, but never mind.
It essentially stops you from having this really, really high at the start of your magical practice and then crashing as soon as you don't have a high energy situation. It's going to make everything a lot more balanced, a lot easier, and it's going to make your practice so much more efficient in...
Okay, now when you're talking about your practice in this particular context, it would make more sense that we're talking about your prayer practice. Alright, your relaxation, engaging with your higher power, whatever it is you want to talk about, okay? But that's not manifesting change in the outer world. There's a difference there. It's more a question of you entering into your peaceful, tranquil, reverent, worshipful state, and therefore you can get into that state with greater ease, so therefore it's a much more enjoyable religious practice. You're not really saying that much more. Okay, I'm going to stop this video and I'm going to start it again as we do the next section of this.